this quick live talk where I'll be sharing about the cycle syncing method for women and how this could be something that could help you learn how to have more effective workouts, how to be more productive at work, how to excel in your career without as much stress or that friction that we sometimes get where it feels like our body is working against all of the goals that we have for ourselves professionally and personally. It's something that has supported myself. It can support so many more women around nutrition choices and knowing how to fuel your body optimally for the different stages of our cycle. So there's so much wisdom that we can learn from the cyclical nature of our body. And I'm so excited to be sharing that with more women now. This is something that I personally went on a very long journey around from the very first time that I had my cycle to today. That has been just a journey of so much discovery, so much really overcoming pain and shame and guilt and so many of these negative emotions that we often associate with our menstrual cycle. And now I know that so many of those things first are ones that we don't have to be living with. We can change the narrative. We can learn to work with our body as opposed to against it. And the next level that I'm really feeling like I'm reaching now, and something that I'm sharing with my clients, is not just about how to accept our cycle and the various stages and phases and the changes that we can do to support it, but really benefiting from it. So not just accepting, but actually embracing, honoring, and taking the most advantage of what our body allows us to do every single month and throughout our life. So I'll start with just a high-level understanding of what cycle syncing actually is. If you've ever heard that term, cycle syncing or the cycle syncing method, essentially in the simplest terms, it means that we learn a little bit about the 4 stages of our monthly cycle, and then we learn how to support each stage. So that's through our nutrition, the workouts that we choose, and the lifestyle choices that we make during those phases. And that's in order to actually use those phases to our advantage. So there's an optimal time for pretty much everything. There's an optimal time to give a presentation at work. There's an optimal time to go on a first date and schedule that. There's an optimal time to be more social and create better first impressions. And even to things like workouts, right? Let's think about more tangible, even more useful ways to use this knowledge that I'll share in a moment. There's actually an optimal time to build muscle, for example. And so think about it. If you're trying to push yourself 100% every single day of the month, that's not only ineffective in a way that you might be wasting your time, and you could be spending that in a better way towards other goals that you have for a portion of the month, but it actually might mean that, there's an optimal time for your body to be rebuilding your muscle, and you're not currently using that. And so, yeah, it's this knowledge that there's an optimal time for everything, and we can really utilize this not just to cope with our symptoms. We actually can work through this knowledge and learn how to support our body all the way through to living symptom-free. That's something that I'm working on now personally, because I have had many, many symptoms over the years that I've slowly overcome one by one through this knowledge and other resources. And yeah, so that's kind of the general orientation around what cycle syncing is when you hear about it. And so what this looks like in practice is you would actually track your cycle from day 1 to about day 28. So a healthy cycle could be anywhere from 25 to 35 days. So 25 is just the average of that. And if you don't have a 28-day cycle, if you don't have a cycle at all, I'll talk about that towards the end too. So don't worry, I'm just going through the basics and the foundations now of what happens in our body, in the women's body throughout the month. So you would start tracking the 28-day cycle from day 1, which would be the start of the follicular phase. So here we're getting into what the 4 different stages and phases are. So the very first one is the follicular phase. And then we go into our ovulatory phase, followed by the luteal phase, and then of course our menstrual phase. So I do break it down into 4 specific phases. Sometimes you might hear this just described as the follicular and the luteal phase, but I really like the nuance of knowing and understanding each one of the 4 phases. So day 1 starts the follicular phase. So this is a time where we are generally most energized that we will be throughout the month. So energy is rising, our estrogen levels are rising to start to rebuild our uterine lining and to prepare our body for ovulation. And so with that, we might be feeling a lot more social, a lot more energetic. We might have an easier time waking up earlier. And here you'll start to already kind of maybe associate like, okay, yeah, I have those times in the month. That generally is something that is true for me and follows the menstrual phase for me. And if that doesn't resonate, that's okay. Again, these are just general things that, we can categorize and generalize. So if you have your own unique things that you experience, different symptoms, or maybe you actually notice lower energy at different times of the month or higher energy at different times of the month, that's also okay. I think we can take all of that as information and know how to work with that. But again, just in general terms, this is what happens during the follicular phase that lasts about 2 weeks. So it's a really solid amount of time, right? If we're thinking about the most high energy time of the month for women and how we can plan our workouts, our work schedule, our nutrition around that. If you are someone who maybe has a little bit more flexibility with your schedule, yes, this becomes a little bit more accessible. But even if you are working in the corporate environment like I did for many years before I switched to full-time coaching, which does allow me more flexibility around planning my work, but even in the 9-to-5 schedule, hopefully you have ways that you can prioritize more meetings or scheduling more meetings or moving them towards that first phase of the month for you. If not, then you can also think about meetings that you want to lead as opposed to just take notes or be a listener in. The follicular phase is going to be that optimal time for you to take advantage of this rising energy. You're going to feel a lot more social, extroverted, and energized, even if perhaps you don't associate as those characteristics regularly. You might notice a surge of that happening, and that actually peaks right around ovulation. So if we think about the follicular phase and those 2 weeks as a whole as a general higher energy time, that gets even more amplified during ovulation, which is about a 3 to 5 day window. Of course, ovulation is a one point in time event that happens when our ovaries release an egg, but building up to ovulation, we have that about 3 to 5 day window of time. And so you might actually notice that energy really peaking on one specific day of the month. So this might become that time for you to schedule your most important presentation, a pitch to a new client. Maybe this is the time for negotiating a raise, or if you do have flexibility around when you schedule a conversation with your manager, maybe there's a monthly check-in, this would be the optimal time to do that during, because it's actually been shown that our negotiation and communication as a whole improves during the follicular and especially the ovulatory phase of our cycle. So the way that our brain changes according to the hormones that are going on in the background throughout the month, this is that time where communication and negotiation and just getting ourselves across in a clear way is most optimal. So right there, you can already start to maybe think about, okay, how can you use this in your life and in your work? Maybe even in your personal life. Maybe there's a really important conversation that you've been putting off with a partner or a family member. This could also be a good time to have that, because again, you're going to have much more clarity of thought and ability to translate that thought into clear communication with the person you're talking to. So there's a few other things that you can do during the follicular phase and into ovulation to kind of optimize, right, this cycle and this 2-week time frame. So one of those things is our workouts. I talk about this a lot with my clients because I think, especially in today's world, we talk about staying in shape, cardiovascular health, VO2 max, our weight loss and muscle goals a lot more, and that's great. I think that's all well intentioned. And at the same time, I think there is this narrative, especially with Instagram and what we might see influencers do, or I think now that we document our life so much, it doesn't even have to be an influencer. It could just be someone in your life that you follow and you notice, others going to the gym. And I see this with women a lot. There's this desire to make it to the gym and stay consistent and be up at 5 a.m. trying to keep up with maybe our male partner or our coworkers, and especially this thought that we should and need to work out as close to every single day as possible, while acknowledging rest days. But even thinking about working out 5 or 6 days a week, that's not necessarily the best thing for women who go through a menstrual cycle, so women of childbearing age, to do. And so how can we take that into account? The follicular phase is actually one of the best times to take advantage of this increase in energy that we have and pack in any of our more strenuous workouts. So this is a great time for more cardio, because you're going to be able to sustain that energy, not feel like you're hitting a wall in your workout. This is a great time for things like weightlifting and in general anything that's focused on growing our muscle, because this is also one of the best times to have really great muscle recovery. So you might notice, again, right, as you're kind of hearing this and taking this in and noticing how it might apply to your life, you might be thinking, I do notice that sometimes I have a workout and I just feel so accomplished after. I feel so strong and I'm not that sore after. Maybe it doesn't stay with me for like the next 2 to 3 days. I'm not noticing as much soreness. That might have been timed with the follicular phase of your cycle, and again into ovulation as well. So that high energy is meant to, be a time that we can take advantage of the energy of renewal, of starting new projects, of creation, of going after our goals and tackling our goals both in work and as it relates to our physical body, anything that you're looking to begin. This is usually a time in the month where we're going to be having an easier time staying motivated. We know that motivation is this really fleeting kind of, it stays with us, but it doesn't, maybe linger for a really long time. This is usually that time where we can initiate, have more energy, put that towards external goals. So it's a great time to, be in action, essentially, at work, in your personal life. That ovulatory phase is, of course, also what I mentioned around communication and feeling like you can communicate easier around your ovulatory phase. That's also one of the best times to schedule a first date or just to be more social. Maybe there are networking events that you're looking to go to, or just anywhere where you're meeting new people, maybe meeting a new potential partner. It's going to be a lot easier for you to just make your best first impression. We know how important first impressions are, so think about it, right? If you're in this energy of creation, of renewal, of feeling really energized and outgoing, you're probably going to be making some amazing first impressions, as opposed to if you're really pushing yourself to show up to something on day 2 of your menstrual phase, and the first impression is going to be so different, right? And we've all been there, where we're feeling really low energy. We actually want to tune inward, but we're forcing ourselves to be out there, to be reaching our goals, to be pushing forward, to be high energy, and it just doesn't work in the same way. And so this is that time, right? We can start to think about, okay, how can I actually use these skills and these phases to my advantage? This is one of them. You can make the best first impressions, communicate better, get your message across. This is a great time to schedule, if you are maybe an entrepreneur, any sort of sales conversations, presentations, giving a big workshop to a group of people. This is one of the best times to do that. So after ovulation, we go into and begin our luteal phase. So this is when estrogen starts to give way for progesterone, and that change in hormones again creates all sorts of different changes in the body. So one of them is that generally, once the luteal phase starts, which is the second 2 weeks of our menstrual cycle of a month, again, just generally, so this would be days about 15 to 28, this is when we start to notice our energy drawing inward. And that might immediately be a negative thing that you're thinking about, like, no, I want to have high energy 100% of the time. But this is also a phase that we can use to our advantage. So what could that look like? As you're noticing energy starting to dip a little bit, you might also notice that you're becoming a lot more introspective and reflective. So in work, in the work environment, whether you work for yourself or again are working a 9 to 5 job, this becomes a great time to reflect back, check in on your goals, budget, do anything that has to do with more admin tasks or maybe learning tasks. So not so much things where you're pushing forward, where you're the face of something, where you're speaking to something or initiating something. This is where you take a step back and notice, how did I do during those first 2 weeks of the cycle? What did I accomplish? What's important for me for the month ahead? So I think of this as the energy and the phase of taking a step back and just reflecting, orienting, and strategizing. So this is also a great time to have more of those strategy conversations, right? This is a great time to reflect back, notice if you're meeting your goals, reflect on what's important to you for the month ahead. This is a great time for goal setting. So that's also something that we can use to our advantage there. It's also a great time from your personal life perspective to do things like clean up the home, organize, donate things to Goodwill, right? Clean out your closet. Again, we're a lot more introspective, meaning that we can take in a lot more information, reflect on it, and instead of, acting on impulse on various things, we can just take a step back, reflect, and notice what will be best for us during this 2-month time frame. And and then during the luteal phase, this is also a time where, because of that lowering of energy that you might notice, you might not be up for cardio, you might not be up for high intensity exercise or anything like that. This is a great time to start to focus on things like Pilates, lower impact weightlifting. So you can still do weightlifting. It might not be as enjoyable or effective or high energy as during the first 2 weeks of the cycle, but this could still be a good time to just think about low impact, not raising your heart rate too much, because you'll probably run out of energy really quickly during a workout like that. Focusing on yoga and restorative activities, or even just switching a workout instead of going to the gym and doing something that you would be, again, really energized for. Thanks, Jesse. This is a good time to, instead of that formal workout, calling a friend and going for a couple-mile walk around your neighborhood, right? Just grabbing a drink and going for a walk and thinking that, as long as you're moving, we can count that as exercise. There is exercise that we can do at every stage in the cycle. It's just not going to look the exact same way, and that's okay. It's important to give yourself that grace. And again, this is why I'm so passionate about this information, is if we don't know that we have the cyclical nature and that there's a time for everything in the cycle, we think that every day has to look the same. We think that every day has to be this high energy, goal oriented, all your tasks are done type of day. But that's not what we see in nature. And I quite literally mean, like, if we look at nature and the way that cycles and seasons work, a leaf is never going to go from green to yellow in a day, right? It's going to go through a full stage of change. And a tree will never shed a leaf and then grow a new leaf the very next day, right? It's going to go through a season, a fall to winter to spring to summer. Hi, yes, I miss you too. Thank you for joining. And that's something that we want to see reflected in the way that we treat ourselves and giving ourselves plenty of grace. And so then, of course, after the luteal phase, we go into the menstrual phase. We kind of all know what's expected there. And this phase too, right? I'm really passionate about not just like what are we taking away, so probably not the best time for high intensity cardio or for getting things done at work in the most efficient way, but what can we introduce instead? It's a great time for things that help restore us, for scheduling a massage, for moving in the way of walking, right? We know that there's a part of our cycle where we might not be up for any kind of movement, but then as soon as we pass that, movement actually feels really good and really restorative to help us move the energy, right? Because during our menstrual phase, obviously we are releasing, we are shedding, both in a physical and an energetic way. And this is what I love about the fact that we have access to these different energies throughout the month. It's that male hormones are on a 24-hour clock. That means every single day in the male biology, they will replenish from the morning into the evening, then they'll have a night of sleep, and they'll start the cycle all over again every single day. So the hormonal fluctuations are pretty much similar for most men throughout their lifetime every single day, whereas we as women are on this 28-day on average cycle. It's actually called the Infradian cycle, which means a cycle that's longer than a day, so it's 28 days. And because we have access to this, it's a little bit like it's part of our innate biology, our innate wiring, right? I love the cyclical nature of the fact that we have access to this, because we have time to restore, we have time to rest, we have time to renew, and we have a time to push, to achieve, to get a lot done. So we have these phases that we can take advantage of, right? And so that also, I think, is really helpful to think of it that way, as cycles of this renewal, growth and renewal and death and rebirth, the cycle, because this is where burnout stops, right? I know that for me, when I was in corporate, thinking about every day having to be at 100, having to be my best, it's us trying to fit ourselves into a mold that many men created, right? Even if we think about women being part of the workforce, that's only been in place for the last several hundred years, maybe, if that. And the way that we are really achieving and the goals that we're trying to set for ourselves today in the corporate world and in entrepreneurship are really at the highest level that I think that they've ever been. And at the same time, there's so much room for burnout. And I saw this in myself. I saw this in my female colleagues at the time, is we're not meant to push 100% of the time. And that also doesn't make us weaker than our male counterparts. It's just something that if we know how to use it, if we know what stage of the cycle we're in, remember that there's things that we can do at each one of those stages. So it's not that we're being unproductive, right? And even maybe that is something to break, that pattern of, if I'm not doing, if I'm resting, that means I'm not productive. I'm really passionate about changing the narrative around rest as a whole. And if we, again, look at that cyclical nature that we have, we are given as many as 3 to 5 days with the goal of rest and reflection and renewal, right? Every single month, there's dedicated time for rest. And so this is where the cycle of burnout starts. And it used to be in place for me, is skipping that, minimizing it, shortening as much as possible, and getting back out there as quickly as possible. In the long run, that's actually what hurts us, because this is us asking too much of ourselves. And my favorite quote about this is from Stacy Sims. She's an author. She's also a former athlete that started to learn all about her performance, and she noticed that her runs and her marathons were not as good and as effective when she was in the luteal phase, which caused her to look more into this. And she's a published author now, and she studies this. And the sub-headline of that book is "Women Are Not Small Men." And again, right, this can be a little bit hard to contextualize at first, because it might be that perceived weakness, right? If I am not on 100%, just like my male colleagues, that must mean that I am weaker or not as capable of achieving as much as them. But this is actually a strategy for overcoming burnout and getting more out of your life and your career in the long run. So I hope that this is just a kind of high-level way for you to start to really get curious about the body. If you are someone, because I get this question a lot, of maybe you're on hormonal birth control, or maybe you don't currently have your cycle, that's okay. What I just covered are the hormonal changes that are accessible when we are not on any sort of hormonal birth control, because we have those natural fluctuations that happen in our body. But if you are, if that's part of your life, that's okay. Part of this knowledge and this wisdom is just learning how can you start to track your own personal cycles. So when I introduced the concept of cycle tracking and tracking how you're feeling day to day, what your hunger levels are like, what emotions you notice, that's something that's accessible to anyone, whether or not you have a cycle or not. And it's important to start to notice that. So again, we can get out of the cycle of needing every single day to look the same, getting out of the cycle of burnout and stress and chronic fatigue. That's exactly where it originates from, is us not checking in with ourselves, not giving ourselves plenty of these cycles that we can at least build in. If we now know that perhaps this is what happens in the background, can we still incorporate these phases for ourselves? Can you still create space for plenty of rest every single month, even if perhaps your hormones are steady every single day of the month? It's so important to recognize that there's a time for everything, and there's a finite amount of energy that we create. So if you don't replenish that, again, looking at this at nature, right, how other animals maybe in the animal kingdom function, and things like hibernation, and just so many fascinating things that go into the way that different species adapt to life. There's cycles that we are meant to take advantage of and renew and restore through. So how can you start to incorporate some of that into your life, into your work, into your workouts, and starting to honor that a little bit better? Because that is exactly what helps us have more energy in the long run, not feel depleted, not feel like we are hitting a wall with our work. This is another big piece that I see happen with a lot of women, is if we push too much for too long, we start to lose that passion for whatever it is that we're doing. And that's what we want to preserve and honor and nurture. And that starts with taking care of our body at every stage of the month, every stage of the cycle. Whether or not you have these hormonal fluctuations or not, you can create these cycles for yourself. What if there was a week where you really focus on pushing, achieving, setting goals, going after those goals, having those meetings? What if that then goes into a phase where you are more introspective, more reflective, right? All of these tasks have to get done anyways, right? We have to budget, we have to buy groceries, we have to plan ahead, we have to meal prep. So if we just slot them in at various cyclical points in the month, might be of benefit. And then of course, can you build in that time for rest? Maybe it's one dedicated weekend a month where you spend time with friends, take care of your body, get a massage, go to the sauna, do things that are really good for you in a restorative way, so that you can replenish and have that energy as you go into that goal setting phase, again, that action oriented phase, from a place of renewal and more energy. So my goal with this information and the work that I do with women, especially women who are entrepreneurs or in corporate like myself in the past, is to have a steady access to energy, to motivation, to prevent burnout and chronic stress on the body. So I mean stress in both an emotional capacity, but also a physical capacity. It's really stressful to try and squeeze every ounce of energy and productivity out of the body 100% of the time. So I think anyone can benefit from this information, even men, but especially women who have a lot of goals, who have a lot of interests, maybe are multi-passionate. It's something that I'm really passionate about, and it's made such a difference in my life and my work, is knowing how to honor this. So I hope that could support you. If you are interested in learning more about this, and if you're watching this in early to mid-November, so on November 14th, Tuesday, November 14th is my next Women's Circle. So you'll find the information for that in the caption, in the link in my bio. And if you are watching this afterwards, after November 14th has passed, you'll find my next, whatever the upcoming live event that I'm having is. It's always going to be in the link in my bio, so you'll always be able to reference it there. And I would just love to hear in the comments what your thoughts are. My goal, again, is not to make it seem like this is a weakness. This is a strength. I hope many of us can start to think of it that way, and just overall to undo, as I mentioned at the beginning, the pattern of pain and shame around this whole part of our life for as many of us as possible. Because I know that was the case for myself, for so many women that I've talked to and worked with, and it doesn't have to be that way. This is not only the most vital and natural part of our body, it's quite literally our fifth vital sign, if you didn't know. That's why most doctors will ask you when your last cycle was, whether it's related to this part of the medical visit or not, they'll usually ask you that. And it's usually that question around, what's going on internally, what's going on in the body, are there any imbalances and things that we should know about? That's how vital and important this part and this area of health is. And I love talking about it, even in the corporate setting, even to other women who might be reaching for those higher level goals, who might think that this is a setback. It's about removing the stigma from this whole part of life. And again, not just learning to accept it, but learning to use it to our advantage. So I hope this is helpful. Let me know what your biggest takeaways are in the comments or what your thoughts are. I'd love to have a conversation around this. And I hope to see you on November 14th if you can join us. It's my monthly women's circle, and I'll be talking all about women's health topics. So a little bit more on how to support each of the 4 phases. There's much more information there for us. So beyond just the workouts, I'd love to talk about optimal nutrition for each of the phases and so much more. And then, as always with my women's circle, the second portion is a releasing breathwork session. So we'll be focusing a lot on the energetics of the womb space, on women's health, of letting go of any of that pain, shame, and guilt that we might have been living with. So I hope that could support you too, and I hope to see you there. Thank you for joining us.